There are infinite universes where humanity thrives, civilizations that reach for stars without fear, where children grow old without ever knowing war, where the word hope isn't whispered like a dangerous secret. Dr. Stephen Strange had seen 14,605 possible futures once, and in the aftermath of that vision, he thought he understood sacrifice. He understood nothing. The transition wasn't gentle. The mirror dimension shattered around him like glass struck by a sledgehammer, reality itself screaming as he tumbled through the space between spaces. Wong's voice cut off mid-warning. The sanctum sanctorium vanished, and Stephen Strange, Sorcerer Supreme, master of the mystic arts, fell into a universe that had forgotten what mercy meant. He came to consciousness in rubble, not the clean destruction of a Thanos attack or dimensional incursion. This was old ruin, the kind that spoke of centuries of decay. The sky above was wrong. 3 moons hung in a purple-black void, and the air tasted of copper and industrial ash. His hands moved through familiar patterns instinctively, and the Eye of Agamotto pulsed warm against his chest, still functional, still connected to the time stone somehow, despite crossing dimensional barriers that should have severed such links permanently. Strange stood, brushing dust from his cloak of levitation. The fabric stirred uneasily against his shoulders, and he understood why immediately. The ambient energy here felt diseased, like touching something left to rot in stagnant water. Every mystical sense he possessed screamed warnings about the fundamental wrongness of this place. Around him stretched what had once been a city, Gothic architecture on a scale that defied engineering sense. Buildings that climbed kilometers into the polluted sky, adorned with eagles and skulls and symbols he didn't recognize. Everything was built too large, as if designed for giants, or perhaps designed to make humans feel appropriately small. The Emperor protects those who seek knowledge in the darkness. If you crave more tales from impossible encounters and cosmic horror, subscribe to witness what happens when different universes collide. The truth is always more terrible than you imagine. Strange's analytical mind cataloged details automatically. Population, millions, judging by the distant sounds of machinery and the sheer scale of habitation. Technology level. Paradoxical. He could see what looked like fusion reactors, but also primitive coal smoke. Architecture, pseudo-religious, authoritarian, designed to inspire submission rather than wonder. Threat assessment, unknown, but his instincts put it somewhere between significant and apocalyptic. A sound made him turn, not footsteps, something heavier, mechanical. They emerged from the ruins like iron angels, massive figures in ceramite armor, each standing over 2 meters tall, moving with a grace that their bulk suggested should be impossible. 8 of them forming a perfect encirclement pattern with military precision that would have impressed even the most disciplined SHIELD unit. Their armor was dark blue, trimmed with bone white, decorated with purity seals and prayers inscribed in languages Strange didn't recognize. But he recognized soldiers when he saw them. These weren't men in armor. They were something that had been men once, transformed into living weapons. The leader stepped forward, a helm-mounted optical array focusing on Strange with unsettling intensity. When he spoke, his voice was amplified by vox speakers, deep and utterly devoid of fear. Unidentified psyker, you will submit to immediate restraint and interrogation. Resistance will be met with terminal force. You have 5 seconds to comply. Strange's hands moved into a defensive position automatically. I'm not your enemy. My name is 4 seconds. Dr. Stephen Strange. I'm not from this world. There's been some kind of dimensional 3 seconds. Weapons hot. The soldiers raised their firearms in perfect synchronization, not guns in any conventional sense. These were bulky, baroque things that hummed with building energy. Strange could feel the charge accumulating, could sense that whatever they fired would punch through most conventional shields with contemptuous ease. 2 seconds. Strange's mind raced. He could defend himself. The crimson bands of Cyttorak would restrain them. The winds of Watum would scatter them. The mirror dimension would remove the entire problem from this plane of existence. But he needed information, needed to understand where he was, what had happened, and how to return home. Starting a fight with what appeared to be local law enforcement seemed counterproductive. But something in the lead soldier's voice told Strange that compliance here meant something far worse than arrest. 1 second. Strange's hands began to glow with eldritch fire as he prepared shields. The cloak spread wide, ready to intercept incoming fire. The Eye of Agamotto pulsed once, twice, and Strange saw something that made his blood run cold. For just a moment, he glimpsed possible futures, not 14 million, but thousands, all branching from this single point. In 93% of them, compliance led to torture, execution, or something worse than death. In the remaining 7%, resistance led to escalating violence that would leave thousands of civilians dead in the crossfire. No good options, no clean victories, just degrees of terrible choices. Welcome to the 41st millennium, Dr. Strange. Here, even omniscience won't save you. 0. The soldiers fired. Strange's shields materialized in overlapping geometries, the Seraphim's protection layered with Agamotto's aegis, mystic constructs that had turned aside blows from cosmic entities. The incoming fire struck like hammers against church bells, each impact reverberating through dimensions Strange hadn't known existed until this moment. The weapons weren't simply ballistic, they were something else, mass-reactive shells that exploded on contact with his barriers, each detonation carrying a secondary payload that felt almost aware, almost hungry. Bolter fire ineffective, one soldier reported, voice flat and mechanical. Target demonstrates theta-level defensive warding, switching to Hellfire rounds. Strange didn't know what Hellfire rounds were, but he suspected the name wasn't metaphorical. The cloak yanked him skyward as the soldiers adjusted their aim with inhuman speed. Strange rotated through the air, hands weaving patterns that would have taken a Kamikaze novice years to master, and the very atmosphere responded. The winds of Watum howled into existence, a localized hurricane that should have scattered the soldiers like toys. They leaned into it, actually leaned forward, their armored boots crushing stone as they anchored themselves through sheer mass and determination. One soldier was pushed back 3 meters. He simply dug in deeper and resumed firing. Meteorological manipulation detected. Pattern matches heretical sorcery. Classification Epsilon 3. Recommend immediate purge protocols. Strange landed on a ruined wall, breathing harder than he should be. These soldiers weren't just resistant to magic. They'd clearly fought magic users before. Their tactics, their weapon selection, even their communication patterns all spoke of institutional knowledge about combating the supernatural, which meant this wasn't a universe where magic was rare or unknown. It was a universe where magic was so common, so dangerous, that humanity had industrialized methods for killing its practitioners. "I don't want to fight you," Strange called out, maintaining his shields as bolter fire continued to rain around him. "I'm trying to understand what's happening here. Give me 30 seconds to explain." "Heretics always talk," the leader interrupted. He made a sharp gesture, and the squad shifted formation. They promise knowledge, understanding, power without price. The Emperor teaches us that such promises are lies, wrapped in damnation. Strange felt the energy shift before he saw the movement. 2 soldiers had circled wide during the exchange, using the ruins as cover with tactical expertise that would have impressed Steve Rogers. They emerged from blind spots Strange hadn't adequately protected, and their weapons were different. Long poles crackling with electric fury. Power mauls, some distant part of Strange's mind supplied, though he had no idea how he knew the term. The cloak intercepted one soldier, wrapping around his helm and yanking backward with enough force to throw an ordinary human into the stratosphere. The soldier stumbled, but didn't fall. Strange deflected the second with a shield, but the impact sent feedback through his mystical defenses that made his teeth ache. Whatever those weapons were, they disrupted magical energy on contact. This was escalating in exactly the way he'd feared. These soldiers weren't afraid of him, weren't even particularly concerned. They were simply executing a protocol they'd clearly performed hundreds of times before. Identify psyker, determine threat level, apply overwhelming force until target ceased to exist. Strange needed to change the paradigm. Enough! His voice carried harmonics that resonated across multiple planes of existence simultaneously, and for just a moment, everything stopped. The cloak released the soldier. Strange lowered his hands, dismissing the more aggressive spells while maintaining only basic shields. You call me a psyker. You think I'm using what? Sorcery, witchcraft, whatever term you have for it here. Semantic distinctions are irrelevant, the leader responded, but his squad held position. Strange had bought himself seconds. Unsanctioned use of warp-derived abilities is punishable by death. You are unregistered. You are unsanctioned. You are heretical by definition. Warp-derived. Strange seized on the term. What if I told you my abilities have nothing to do with your warp, that I draw power from entirely different dimensional sources? Then you would be lying. All psychic phenomena stem from the Imperium. This is fundamental reality in this universe. Perhaps Strange took a calculated risk. I'm from somewhere else. Somewhere your fundamental reality doesn't apply. Look at my defenses. Have you ever seen shields structured like this? Geometries like this? I'm not denying I use what you might call supernatural abilities, but I'm not what you think I am. The leader's helm tilted slightly. Strange recognized the gesture. It was consideration, however slight. These soldiers were fanatics, but they weren't stupid. They'd noticed his defenses were wrong in ways that didn't match their understanding of how psykers operated. You claimed dimensional translocation, said the leader slowly, from beyond the astronomican's light. Strange had no idea what an astronomican was, but he nodded anyway. Yes, I didn't intend to come here. Something went wrong during a ritual, and I was pulled across dimensional barriers. I need to understand where I am so I can find a way home. Silence stretched for 5 seconds that felt like 5 hours. The soldiers remained perfectly still, weapons trained on Strange with unwavering accuracy. He could feel them communicating on channels he couldn't access, probably internal Vox networks built into their armor. Finally, the leader spoke. You will accompany us to the precinct fortress. You will submit to binding and interrogation by sanctioned personnel. If your claims prove truthful, the Inquisition will determine your fate. If you are lying, he didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Strange understood the choice he was being offered. It wasn't a good choice, but it was marginally better than the alternative, and it would get him access to whoever ran this society, to people with answers. I'll come peacefully, but I need you to understand something first. Where I come from, I'm called the Sorcerer Supreme. I'm the primary defender of my reality against mystical threats. I've fought gods, demons, and things that exist outside conventional reality. I'm telling you this not as a threat, but so you understand that if I wanted to fight my way out of this situation, your squad wouldn't be enough to stop me. The leader actually laughed, a harsh, amplified bark of genuine amusement. Confirmed. Target demonstrates patterns consistent with pride-based delusion, typical pre-corruption psychology. He raised one massive gauntleted hand. I am Brother Sergeant Oren of the Ultramarines 5th Company. I have personally killed 3 demon princes, 74 greater daemons, and more heretical psychers than your primitive cognition could calculate. My brothers and I have fought in wars that consumed entire solar systems. Oren took one heavy step forward. So understand this, witch. Your power means nothing here. Your titles mean nothing here. In the 41st millennium, there are only the faithful and the damned. Prove which you are, or die like all the others who thought themselves exceptional. Strange met the eye lenses of Oren's helm and saw only absolute certainty reflected there. These weren't soldiers who could be reasoned with through displays of power or philosophical argument. They were true believers in a creed Strange didn't yet understand, and true belief was the most dangerous force in any universe. He'd come here looking for answers. Instead, he'd found a place where questions themselves might be heresy. "Lead the way," Strange said quietly. The bindings they clamped around his wrists were inscribed with symbols that made his mystical senses recoil. Suppression runes, he realized, crude but effective. They wouldn't stop him if he truly needed to act, but they'd slow him down significantly. As the Ultramarines marched him through ruins towards whatever fortress awaited, Strange glimpsed the people of this world for the first time. Crowds of civilians watched from shattered windows and ruined doorways, thin, malnourished, dressed in rags. And the look in their eyes as they watched the Space Marines pass wasn't fear, it was worship. The precinct fortress was a monument to paranoia-made architecture. Walls 10 meters thick, gun emplantments every 50 meters, and enough razor wire to fence off a small continent. Strange's mystical senses told him more disturbing truths. The entire structure was warded, inscribed with symbols that didn't quite magical, but achieved similar effects through sheer concentrated belief, faith weaponized into geometry. They descended through checkpoints that grew progressively more oppressive. Each level demanded biometric scans, genetic verification, and purity screenings that Strange didn't fully understand. The Ultramarines submitted to each without complaint, which told him these measures weren't personal. This was simply how this civilization functioned. Trust nothing, verify everything, and assume corruption lurked behind every smile. The interrogation chamber was exactly what Strange expected. Bare rockcrete walls, a single metal chair bolted to the floor, and lighting positioned to create maximum psychological discomfort. What he didn't expect was the woman waiting for him. She was perhaps 40, though her eyes looked centuries older. Her attire was functionally elegant, black body glove beneath a long coat adorned with a symbol Strange recognized instinctively, a stylized eye bisected by a skull. Her left hand was augmetic, the mechanical fingers moving with unsettling precision as she reviewed data on a handheld device. "Inquisitor Kale," Oran said, managing to make even that simple introduction sound like a prayer. "The prisoner has requested the—" "Thank you, Brother Sergeant. You and your squad are dismissed. I'll handle the interrogation personally." Strange saw Oran hesitate, the first genuine uncertainty he'd witnessed from the Ultramarine. "Inquisitor, the target demonstrates significant psychic potential. Protocol suggests I'm aware of protocol." Kale's voice carried absolute authority, despite its conversational tone. "I'm also aware that your definition of interrogation typically involves bolt rounds and flamethrowers. I need this one capable of coherent speech, which means I need him intact." She glanced at Strange, and he felt her gaze like a physical weight. "For now." The Ultramarines withdrew, their footsteps fading into silence that felt heavier than sound. Strange remained standing, the suppression cuffs cold against his wrists. Kale circled him slowly, and he recognized the technique, establishing dominance through controlled examination, making the subject feel like a specimen rather than a person. "Sit," she said. Strange didn't move. "I'd prefer to stand." That wasn't a request. The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. Frost began forming on the walls, and Strange felt pressure building behind his eyes. Psychic assault. Crude but powerful, attempting to force compliance through pure mental domination. He met it with trained resistance. The mental disciplines he'd learned at Camartage holding firm against the onslaught. After 5 seconds, the pressure vanished. Kale smiled, and it wasn't friendly. "Interesting. Most unsanctioned psychers fold immediately when I apply pressure. You barely registered discomfort." She gestured to the chair again. "Please sit. I promise the next request will be significantly less pleasant." Strange sat, not because he was afraid, but because he needed this conversation. Information was more valuable than pride. Kale took position across from him, close enough that Strange could see the augmetic ports at her temples, interface jacks that suggested she could connect directly to technology. "Your arrival was detected by orbital auspex arrays approximately 47 minutes ago. Unregistered warp translation. No Geller field signature, no ship identification codes. You simply appeared in reality, as if stepping through a door." She leaned forward. "So tell me, Dr. Strange. And yes, I know your name from the psychic interrogation you didn't notice. What are you?" "I already told your soldiers. I'm from another universe, a dimensional traveler who don't insult my intelligence." Kale's augmetic made a gesture, and holographic displays materialized in the air between them. Strange saw himself, hundreds of images captured from dozens of angles during his brief fight with the Ultramarines. Each image was annotated with data he couldn't fully read.
I've spent 30 years studying the ways chaos corrupts humanity. I've seen demons wear human faces. I've watched possessed psychers claim they were innocent victims of circumstance right until they tried to tear my face off with their teeth. She swiped through images, and Strange saw recordings of his spells frame by frame. These patterns you weave, they're not conventional psychic abilities. The warp doesn't structure itself in geometric mandalas. It doesn't create shields that refract across spatial dimensions like prismatic glass. Whatever you're doing, it's wrong in ways I've never encountered. Because it's not warp-based, Strange said quietly. I draw power from other sources, the Vishanti, the Seraphim, ancient entities that exist outside conventional space-time, but aren't, he chose his words carefully, aren't whatever your chaos represents. Kale studied him for a long moment. The Emperor teaches us that all supernatural power stems from the warp, that anything claiming otherwise is simply lying about the source of its corruption. And yet, she zoomed in on one image, Strange's hands mid-gesture, trails of golden light forming symbols that hung in the air. These patterns trigger no psychic resonance, no demonic signatures. My null servitors registered 0 immaterial presence during your capture. Because there was no immaterial presence. What I do isn't possession or channeling in the sense you mean. It's learned technique combined with dimensional manipulation. I studied for years to master these abilities. They don't come from gods whispering in my ear or entities demanding worship. Everything demands worship, Kale said flatly. That's the one universal truth. The only question is whether you're honest about the price. She stood pacing the small room. You claim you're from another universe entirely. That implies the existence of realities beyond the materium and immaterium. That suggests the Emperor's truth, that humanity's struggle against chaos is the central conflict of existence, might be localized. Strange heard what she wasn't saying. That suggestion alone was probably heresy. Questioning the fundamental nature of reality in this universe seemed to carry severe theological implications. I don't know enough about your universe to comment on its metaphysics, but yes, where I come from, there are multiple dimensions, multiple realities, all coexisting in a kind of cosmic multiversal structure. What you call the warp might be unique to this reality. Or it might be one manifestation of something larger. I genuinely don't know. Honesty, Kale laughed, and it sounded like breaking glass. That's either refreshing or the most sophisticated lie I've ever encountered. She returned to her seat, steepling her fingers. Here's what's going to happen. I'm going to remove your suppression cuffs. You're going to demonstrate your abilities under controlled conditions. And at any point, if I detect even the slightest hint of warp taint, if you manifest tentacles, if your eyes bleed black ichor, if you start speaking in tongues or promising forbidden knowledge, I will execute you so quickly you won't have time to regret your deception. She reached forward, and Strange felt the cuffs disengage. Power flooded back into his hands, and for a moment he was tempted, desperately tempted, to simply open a portal and leave this nightmare behind. But he didn't know how. The dimensional barriers here felt different, denser, and attempting translocation without proper preparation might shred him across 1,000 realities. "Show me," Kale said softly. "Show me what a Sorcerer Supreme can do."
Convince me you're not damned. Strange raised his hand slowly, giving her time to react if she interpreted the gesture as hostile. Then he began the simplest spell in his repertoire, the basic conjuration exercise every Kamar-Taj student learned in their first week. Golden light spiraled from his fingers, coalescing into a perfect geometric mandala that rotated in three-dimensional space. Kale watched as Strange saw something flicker across her face. Not fear, not suspicion. Wonder. "Emperor's mercy," she whispered. "It's beautiful." Strange understood then what made this woman dangerous. She wasn't a fanatic who refused to see evidence. She was someone who'd spent so long fighting monsters that genuine magic, power without corruption, looked like a miracle. And that made her either his best ally or his most dangerous enemy.